I'm going to talk a little bit about designing for Type 1 fun, for the tropes, archetypes and memes that go with it. This topic was inspired by the wave of LARPs, which are a little darker, a little more focused on inner turmoil, on drama, and on negative emotions, on basically traumatizing the poor characters and then coming out with very strong negative emotions. And the need, or at least something that I consider a need, to create some more wholesome games, or at least games with lighter themes. And then I started wondering, what if the reason why we don't have too many Type 1 games is because they are not as deep or as meaningful as the other type. So before we get to that point, let me just quickly talk about the two types of fun that we engage in as LARPers. So back when we were kids, back when we started enjoying play, we had all sorts of scenarios in our heads. We would take our Barbies or action figures or whatever else, and we would make them go through either family drama or some adventures, and not all of them were very wholesome. Some of them were very happy, and you had this very happy setup where everybody lived happily ever after, like the children's stories taught us, and then some were really dramatic, where you just wanted to play zombies and you wanted to play the end of the world. And this also translated into LARP later on. So there are a couple of types of fun, like I mentioned, which are categorized as, very colloquially, Type 1, Type 2, and then there's also Type 3, which we get to in a moment. The Type 1 fun is fun throughout the experience, the enjoyment every step of the way, often for both the character and the player. The purpose of this is to basically have an enjoyable experience, stemming from the fact that a lot of people use LARP as a kind of vacation. And since that's what you are aiming for on vacation, to just relax, to have this sense of community, of belonging, of telling a story with a happy ending, it's qualified as Type 1, the default state of play. But that's not the only type of fun. There's also Type 2, which is slightly darker. It puts the character through a series of physical and or emotional hardships. And the character hates the experience, of course, but the player enjoys it very, very much. This is a shot from Convention of Thorns, where the game is extremely fun to play, but it's not easy. There are a lot of very dark themes. It's full of violence, it's full of scheming, politics, backstabbing, and people are enjoying themselves to the fullest, but their characters are suffering horribly. And this is a prime example of Type 2, meaning your character is having the worst time possible, but you are just living for it. And then there's also Type 3, which isn't officially recognized as a type of LARP. I call it fun by proxy. It usually happens, you realize this actually after the game. So you didn't have a great time at the game. You feel like maybe you either wasted your time or you maybe could have done something better. So it's either resentment or sadness or even regret. But something weird happens. So people after the game are talking about what an amazing experience it was, and they are often mentioning the scenes which you were in and mentioning them as the highlight of their game. And so very slowly you're starting to convince yourself that, you know what, actually it was a very cool experience. And this often happens also because, let me just quickly forward to that. This also happens because you see the pictures. And the pictures make you believe that the experience was much better than it truly was, which is not true. So your brain lies to you. And this might also result in you buying a ticket to a second installment of this game, even though it wasn't very fun for you because you are convinced that it was fun even though it wasn't. So this is the type 3. But the intended ones, the two that are consciously that consciously exist as categories, are type 1, the fun ones, and type 2, the slightly less fun ones that both end in great experiences. So how do we manufacture a great experience for ourselves? So there are two chemical reactions that happen in our brain. One produces dopamine, the other produces serotonin, and all of them work towards the same goal, to make us feel as well as we possibly can. And games, just play in general, and relaxation through action serve this exact purpose, to give us either dopamine or serotonin. And both of these, or either of these, can also be stimulated by community, meaning that we feel good when we are doing things with other people. This is something that is extremely important in LARP, because LARP is a collaborative effort, and collaborating and co-creating something with other people means that we can trigger happiness in ourselves as well as in others. The question is, how do we do that? Meaning, what types of experiences are we triggering for ourselves and the community? And what road do we take to triggering dopamine or serotonin in ourselves? So let's have a look at manufacturing wholesomeness through the eyes of players. So these shots are from the same game. This was College of Wizardry. College of Wizardry is a game set in a magical universe, in basically like a copy of our universe where magic exists, but it's kept secret, and some people are born with magical powers. So they need to keep those powers secret from so-called mundanes, so everyday people. And there's a college which trains them in using magic responsibly, meaning to hide them from their powers from the mundanes, but at the same time to choose paths in which they can specialize. This is a game which is centered around the theme of community, belonging. It's very, very wholesome. People can bring their own plot lines into the game, meaning that the only thing that the organizers give them, aside from an overarching plot which runs in the background and players don't necessarily have to engage with it, is the structure of a school, but all the stories that people bring are their own. So they can write their own character, or they can get one from the organizers, and everything that is related to this character's story is related to the feeling of belonging. So, which house am I going to be sorted into? Which clubs will I join? Will I pull a prank on my teachers? Or if I play a teacher, will the students help me regain memory of my lost love? Something like that. It's all very heartwarming, very wholesome. And the whole communities, which are created around houses, like here, one of the houses, the one represented by the colors red and silver, this is something that creates the feeling of being among people who are very like-minded and very tightly knit. It's basically the staple of type 1 fun, the feeling of belonging, community, of having something in common with others. And then there is this situation. This is one of the classes at College of Wizardry, which was focused on torturing people, which also happens at the same wholesome game. This is a type 2 moment, definitely, where students are asked or required to drink potions that cause them some unpleasant sensations. So this isn't a theme throughout the game, that people are suffering and that horrible things are happening to them, but it's a possibility at this game. So either it will happen as a class, as a singular event, and just trigger some future interactions, or people can use this as a vehicle for their entire personal arc. So in this wholesome house, that is all about community and belonging, we can have a character who writes their story much darker. And still it won't necessarily clash with the feeling of wholesomeness, because those stories can coexist next to each other. College of Wizardry is a game that's been running for 10 years. It's the 10-year anniversary right now, this year. And people keep coming back to it over and over and over again, specifically for this feeling of belonging, of wholesomeness, for type 1 fun. College of Wizardry had spin-offs, which are set in a dark timeline. They're called Werewar, and they are a war-themed story, very dark, very type 2, about those witchers, as we call them, meaning magical people, being at war with magical creatures. So werewolves, vampires, fae. It's a very difficult game to play. It has a lot of trauma. Their characters are dying there or getting traumatized in different ways. It also focuses on very difficult topics of survivor's guilt, of dealing with the loss of somebody that we love or care about, of responsibility, of heroism. It's a completely different franchise of games, and still people are more eager to play College of Wizardry as it is because of the wholesomeness. So there's definitely something about this type 1 experience that draws people in and makes them want to still be part of this magical place at Choha. Okay, so manufacturing type 1 fun can be done consciously by players and by organizers. Players can do this before the game, during the game, and even after the game. Before the game, they can do it by making costumes and props and anything they will be using later. It brings some people who like this kind of thing immense enjoyment to tailor the character to the needs. To think, okay, so what's going to be my character's vibe? Maybe they have a special outfit that they wear. Maybe they have props, amulets. How do I design this person that I'm going to embody? This is something that automatically produces the happiness hormones in people. Whimsical pre-play. Pre-play is something that is very conducive to creating stories before the game and then having them develop over the course of the game. And for College of Wizardry specifically, pre-play is something that is encouraged. There is a platform called Whispers. It used to be called Chohabook, which imitates social media, where witchers can interact with one another. They can have their own drama there, but mostly it's used for those whimsical pre-play moments, like having house parties or going on adventures together. So people can already plant seeds for this wholesome experience before the game even starts. In-person meetups or online hangouts. When people are hyped for the game, it's fantastic to keep up this hype by either meeting in person if they live in the same area or don't mind traveling, or have online hangouts. For instance, for College of Wizardry, the houses, people who are already sorted into the houses, so prefects and seniors and sophomores, often have meetings online on Discord or other platforms to chat about what they want the house to look like, or what they want the initiation for the juniors to look like, or just to get to know one another. And this also creates this feeling of community and of wholesomeness. Character co-creation. So like I mentioned, at some games, the game masters allow the players to have input on their characters, even if the players are not welcome to write them from scratch. Sometimes they can still give input. And this input is definitely important to feeling ownership of the character and their story. And they can also tell the game masters what kinds of plot lines they're interested in and what kind of vibe they're going for. So if I don't want to play a heavily traumatized character at some LARP, I am going to have a chance if the creators let me co-write the character, or at least put something in a character form that will kind of direct the character in a certain way. And finally, and this is controversial, adding some Mary Sue or Gary Sue elements to the character's backstory. Let's see if I have a slide explaining that phenomenon. No, I don't, never mind. So Mary Sue, Gary Sue are those tropes which basically stem from literature and popular culture, when you have a character who is too perfect. So they are just the most beautiful, the most desired, the most skilled. They are a level 1 bard who can do everything. They are a warrior, a knight, and also their divinity loves them. And their one flaw is that they're clumsy. So basically they have no weaknesses. And at LARPs, those characters are usually laughed at, but not always, because sometimes they can actually add more to the story than do harm. And while they may not be fun to interact with if they're too over the top, they're extremely fun to engage with if they do what their main purpose is, so to manufacture wholesomeness. And putting elements like these into characters without making all of them the Mary Sue / Gary Sue template works fantastically well, and I wholeheartedly encourage people to give their character some little smudge of perfection in one area at least, or at least if not perfection then advantage. So this is what we do before the game. Now during the game, a sense of joy, excitement and wonder. Give it to your character whether it should exist for them or not. I love for my characters to be excitable. This encourages me as a player, and the character gets an alibi to go out and explore, to engage with fun situations. This is something that not only helps us connect with other people, but also gives us a foot in the door into stories that otherwise wouldn't be of interest to us. So even if I'm a technologically inclined character that really doesn't really care about anything else, I will put curiosity in there to at some point steer away from this little genre and then go explore other avenues just so I can experience this joy through the character. Positive relations and interactions. I've made mistakes in the past, especially when creating villains or playing villains, where I only had antagonists to play with. And I think that every character, every single one, deserves some positive relations and interactions, if not for the purpose of the character itself, then for the purpose of making the player not feel alone. And even at a game that is very wholesome, like College of Wizardry, where we do have antagonists among players, they need allies, and they still need some positivity interactions or little groups that they can play with. A feel-good overarching story or a personal character arc. When designing a wholesome character, we need to give them a feel-good story. So let's say that we have an underachieving junior at a school game who is only learning the ropes of this strange world. Let's give them a chance to actually prove that they're good at something, to step out of the shadows and shine in some way, so that you can feel like your character has gone through a character arc, improved somewhere. It doesn't have to be an easy road, but keep in mind that it should be something that will end in a satisfactory way. So the goal here isn't to leave this person at the very end of their story feeling like they've lost something or like they went unnoticed. The goal is to give them a chance to explore their weaknesses and find their strengths, and that's the wholesomeness. Finally, we have the absolute no-no, which is character death. Losing a character when you haven't consented to it can be a bummer at the LARP. this is some stories definitely can benefit from it, especially if those are games that are focused on this kind of experience. But for wholesomeness and for type 1 fun, the player needs to be in charge of their story because they need tools to steer it towards the happier parts when they feel like the darkness is encroaching. And character death will absolutely eliminate the chance, which means that the technique that is used at many LARPs, making the player responsible for the fate of their character, so the character decides what happens the player decides what happens to the character, is a way out of that. Meaning that if I jump out of the bushes at somebody in the middle of a road, they can still decide what I did to them. Many LARPs completely don't play on the theme of death. The College of Wizardry game mentioned before doesn't have that possibility for players. Meaning this is a LARP about school. If somebody wants a dramatic death, they can still do it, but it's not in the rules because it doesn't matter to the story. So yeah, sure, you can kill off your character, but be aware that you are completely shifting the tone of the entire game, because let's say that you're part of a house. Suddenly, there is a corpse in the middle of the school and everybody around you needs to react to it. So many LARPs that are not about an experience like that just erase this possibility completely or leave it as opt-in with a caveat: please consult the other players if you want to do it, or please do it near the end of the game, just so everybody's emotional safety is preserved and the wholesome moment is not ruined. And then there's also, if I can manage to find an arrow on this keyboard, after the game. So how to keep this type 1 experience after the game, because once the game ends, this wholesomeness needs to still stay in. And many players use such methods as looking at photos, writing epilogues, and telling each other some personal stories. There are entire threads on social media saying, hey, tell me the best scene at this game, or a compliment thread. So you put your name there, the character that you played, and then you wait for people to write some cool things about you. For instance, oh my gosh, I remember this very cool moment that we had. Those really help with the containment of the feeling of happiness after the game has ended. There is also the positive bleed, which is when the feelings of your character seep into you and stay there to make you feel all fluffy after the game. There are after parties and hangouts after the after the game, which help you stay in touch with the people who were part of your adventure for a couple of hours or a couple of days. And there is also post-play, meaning that some people like to still role-play after a game. Some games even create platforms for that, like the previously mentioned College of Wizardry, which has this whole Facebook-like platform specifically for pre-play and then for a couple of weeks for post-play, where people can still play on the ending of their story. So if my story ended with a grand victory, I can still role-play for a little bit so that my character can feel the effects of that victory. And then I can also feel like, yes, I've accomplished something and other people can engage with it. So this is one of the coolest moments at College of Wizardry. This is the awarding of the House Cup. This is the final scene of the game, where we find out which house was the winning one when it comes to the points. Points can be gathered throughout the game, and even though there is just one winner, it's such a fun and such an uplifting moment when the entire school comes together. All of them stand near, like under the balcony, look up when the staff announce the winner. It goes for about half an hour, and I can swear to you that for half an hour, every single person in that room, and it's 120 people, are standing and just looking up and just like embracing one another. It's one of the most wholesome things to watch ever. So, there are some design principles as to how to make sure that players have a wholesome experience, a type 1 experience. First of all, and this is also something that I love at any lab that I run, it's allowing players to bring their own ideas. Players know best what they want to play and what kind of story they want to go for. So always at the stage of a sign-up, I leave them some space to tell me what they want to do. And again, allow some Mary Sue elements to their personality, because their stories can be very complex. But if somebody wants to play a Mary Sue personality, I'm totally okay with that. I'm not going to curb that. If this is going to enhance their experience and make them feel good about themselves, sure, go for it. Creating optional storylines which play up characters. There are some players who are not very visible. They still deserve some love, and quite often, if I know that it's a person who is a bit in the shadows, especially if I know that this person always creates play for others, I will go out of my way to try and play them up. So I will create a hero moment for them, or I will create something for them to make them feel noticed and lifted up. At games like these, there will be no dark plot lines coming from the organizers, so no sudden attack that will leave people wounded or dead. More focus on pranks and light-hearted shenanigans, love stories, things that can have a happy ending because they are designed for those happy endings instead of the darkness. No character death, or character death being optional, because it's not a story about that. Or if it is a story about that, then leave the decision to the player in question, whether this is the moment that they want their character to die or not. And finally, the consistency with the theme, which is the most difficult thing to achieve, especially when people are allowed to bring their own characters and their own stories. How do you make sure that your Type 1 game stays Type 1 if you can see that somebody can bring in a freaking Dark Lord of 7 Hells and play Beelzebub there? Well, you go through character approvals. You go through character approvals when you read every single line that the player sent to you and you see, oh, that looks like we have a Beelzebub here. How about we turn him into something less evil? Because this isn't a game about that. There are also scene requests. At some games, players can request a specific scene to happen and an NPC. So while the organizers know about this, they can immediately reach back to the player and say, okay, so how about we don't give you an army of werewolves to attack the school because we are having a ball and everyone is happy. We don't want people to just go against one another like that. But here's an alternative. So there are some pitfalls to that, I'm not gonna lie. And I've already mentioned a couple of that. One of the pitfalls, which I'm struggling with a lot, is unconfirmed self-written characters. So you can ask people to send you their characters for approval. You can beg them, you can send them reminders every single week, and there will still be people who will come and play something else. Or you will approve their characters, send them feedback, and say, how about you don't play Beelzebub, the Lord of 7 Hells? And then they will come up with Jeff, and then midway through the game, Jeff will turn into Beelzebub, the Lord of 7 Hells. There is no going around that. It's gonna happen at some point. And I have no answer to that. The Mary Sue carries to character abilities. So I'm totally okay with people playing Mary Sue personalities. I absolutely hate characters who can do everything and have no weaknesses. They can very quickly overshadow the other characters and other types of play. They can steamroll the game with their personal plot lines, which are designed for these characters to shine. They can hog the spotlight. Usually, it's kind of easy for the community to teach the community, if it's small enough, to self-regulate and to discourage this kind of play. But if it's a mixture of players who don't know one another, it's a bit tricky. Player-led storylines with heavy themes. Again, it's like with unconfirmed characters. If we don't know that they are going to happen, your wholesome game may suddenly have some dark themes that you don't know about. And then you will find out after the game, or when a bunch of traumatized people come and tell you that this happened. Inconsistency with the theme. This is again coming back to the characters and the storylines that don't fit the wholesomeness. And then finally, character death around unprepared witnesses. So we can tell people, we can ask them, please, if you want your character to die, either come to us and we will figure something out, or plan it so that it's happening not in the middle of the main hall when everyone is dancing at the ball. And still people may want to do that. Or they may just not think about how it's going to be perceived or played by other people. And then we have a problem. But those are the risks that we have to take, and I honestly don't have answers how to avoid all that other than just asking people to be mindful of others' experiences. So I have a couple of LARPs, examples of LARPs that have wholesome ideas behind them, but are not specifically designed to be very happy LARPs. Meaning, for instance, in the case of red shirts, death is not the end, but death is the major and basically the main theme of the game. Characters die at this game, a lot. As a red shirt in Star Trek, which this is inspired by, these characters are freshly recruited members of the crew of a starship that goes on a specific mission, and their role is to die in the most ridiculous and epic ways that they can. It's immensely fun. They start with basically a one word character name and a couple of words of description, because they're background characters, so nobody cares to give them a backstory. And then over the course of the LARP, as they die and return as a new character in the limbo, they start figuring out what's happening. So they get some memories, they get some depth. The new characters, the new red shirt that they represent, because they always come back as a new red shirt with a new name and a backstory, they remember more, and they have more backstory, and they are more fleshed out characters. Some of them may even get elevated to blue shirts, which means that the risk of dying is dramatically lowered, and their game shifts a little bit. But this is still a really fun experience, because they get to die for fun, and it's a mechanic to enhance their enjoyment rather than to destroy it. And I think that implementing twists like this on mechanics that are kind of harmful to someone's play can actually prove to be very entertaining to people, because they can finally take some element of the game that they usually dread and go wild and have fun with it. Okay? Yes, I can. I have a meme. This was one of the memes that I used for the promotion of my game. I think that everybody knows the trope of the red shirts well enough to know how the game was going from the workshop onwards. If they didn't, they caught on very quickly, because at the workshops, one of the first tasks that they had to do was to die in an epic way. This is a picture from the workshops. They were supposed to freeze in a pose that showed their last moments. So somebody was getting eaten by something, someone was being crushed by something, someone was flying out of the airlock. And the design principles for a game like this were create simple characters with no traumatic backstory. Like I said, a couple of words, those were my characters. It wasn't about them. it was about the mission, or at least at first it wasn't about that, so that they didn't grow attached to the character and they were very curious about the mystery behind what was happening at the game, and only as the plot progressed they realized, okay, so the characters themselves as individuals are not important, but we as players are, so we can do whatever, we can go wild with our death scenes and we will still enjoy the story. It was never boring, there was action happening all the time, and opportunities to die were being thrown left and right, while also giving people space who didn't want the character to die right now to do their own thing. Death pushed the story forwards, it didn't completely eliminate the player. And the characters, the last point was very important. The characters started with zero agency, so their fate was predetermined. They were the red shirts, they were supposed to be basically cannon fodder, and every dangerous mission meant that no blue shirts would be sent out, only the red shirts. So people knew from the get-go, yeah, this is going to be my fate, this is going to be my game, I'm gonna roll with it. The pitfalls of that. This is what I feared before the game. I was afraid that because the game wasn't transparent and the plot was kind of a secret, as in there was a mystery, that the players would be a bit worried about taking risks and that they wouldn't want their characters to die, that they would be very, very careful about that. They weren't. They were just throwing themselves on left and right at danger. I was worried about the backstory, because usually when you play a LARP, you want to have a well-fleshed-out character that you can delve into and understand their motivations, and here those were basically one-dimensional pieces of paper with zero depth. Those were their characters at the start, and I was really afraid that people wouldn't be able to play them. And then finally, due to the randomization of missions and of the outcomes of missions, I was afraid that some people would have those death experiences and the development of the story at a very quick pace, and the others would not. This also turned out to not be a problem, but potentially it could have happened. So I was very afraid that without a fleshed out character, they would be stuck with the one-dimensional thing for hours. Another game that was designed around the wholesomeness of the experience was Adventurers Academy. It wasn't a feel-good LARP in the sense that everybody was playing My Little Pony and we all end with a happy ending, but it was based on the tropes of Dungeons and Dragons. So we had adventuring parties, everybody was playing a level 1 adventurer. So they were people from various places in the world. There were princes and there were peasants. There were people from all walks of life who suddenly found out that they were the chosen ones, that they would suddenly have some sort of a destiny to fulfill. This game could have turned very dark very quickly, and we were a bit afraid of that, but there were a couple of elements that were implemented to prevent that from happening. So first of all, our main design principle was, just because it's a bad idea doesn't mean it's not going to be a good time. So if you have a stupid idea, go ahead and do it. Absolutely do it. You're not going to die. There was no death at that game. There were consequences, but the consequences pushed the game forward. So failure was written into their story. You guys are level 1. Of course you're going to fail. Don't be afraid to fail. Failure is fun. If you see a beholder who is level 20 and you're level 1 bard, absolutely go get that stick and go poke it in the eye. It's a great idea. Go see what happens. And people just took this idea and they ran wild with it, and it was amazing. So character death could happen at this game at very specific moments, in very specific circumstances. Players knew what circumstances there were, and they had to specifically go out of their way to look for those situations, and still it wouldn't be the end. There was something waiting, there was gameplay. Some of the workshops were diegetic, meaning that we divided workshops into 2 parts. Some of them were very theoretical, as they should be, so explaining the rules, but the others, the mechanics of the games, were done in-game. So the first part of the first day was the adventurers, the level 1s, coming to the academy and learning what powers they're going to have by role-playing that with the instructors who are showing them how the mechanics work. This already helped them feel like heroes of Dungeons and Dragons. We were playing a lot of on tropes and archetypes, so the horny bard or the brave barbarian. All those tropes added to the fun, and the people were just throwing themselves at the archetypes like there was no tomorrow. And finally, we picked only one part of the hero's journey to focus on. So hero's journey is this kind of a principle of storytelling used in the most famous stories across time, in books, movies, basically everywhere, where we have a reluctant hero who is faced with a fate they don't really want to follow, but then something happens and then they decide, yep, I'm going to be a hero. They meet a mentor, they meet an obstacle, yada yada yada. We decided to put our story here, when they've already decided to take on their destiny, but they haven't been trained yet. So they're at the very start of their journey, they've already accepted it, but they have no idea what's ahead. And to us, this was the most interesting part of the hero's journey, from the perspective of a fun experience, just for pure entertainment, because they are still completely new to this. And they can just go wild and try things and fail at things, just be level 1 adventurers. Some of the pitfalls that we were very afraid of when designing this game, we were wondering if people's play styles would match. So when you are playing D&D, I don't know how many people are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, I hope that you are. You kind of want to win against the enemy. So failing is something that some people may have a problem with. And at this game, since everybody was playing level 1, it was kind of a prerequisite that not everything will be successful, and you guys are still baby adventurers, you're not going to necessarily win everything. So this play style of a playing to win mentality, that I absolutely need to vanquish this beholder even though I only have a stick, that was our concern. Then another one that we were worried about was failing to match the tone of scenes. Since it was a game that had a very varying set of scenes, we were wondering if, for instance, if there is a very serious scene when a mentor is talking to a mentee about their destiny in the future, there isn't going to be a horny bard with a barkeep just like fumbling through half naked and ruining the mood. This could have happened. Luckily, we had players who were very conscious of the environment, and they tried not to encroach on other people's scenes, and they were doing their bardic thing elsewhere. And finally, we were very worried about some themes being introduced that were a bit bleak and difficult, which would completely ruin the mood of the game. This was fixed by us before the game by writing the stories and the motivations into each character. So even if players gave us their character ideas, we tweaked them to avoid the type 2 thing. So there was nobody who had such a tragic backstory that it would completely steamroll over everything else. There were still wholesome pieces, there was still a lot of lightheartedness to play on, and there was no risk, or so we thought, and so we still hope, of this turning into a disaster. Basically, what the international community thought for the longest time was that only type 2 games can tell profound stories, because only through feeling a lot of those complex negative feelings you can feel deeper emotions and explore something within yourself. I disagree. I think that type 1 fun has a lot of potential of driving something wholesome towards some deeper positive emotions, and also having people have transcendent and transformative feelings. But the type 2 belief was that conflict proposed the story, and that conflict also triggers some emotions. The tension is a vehicle and not the end game. So basically, whenever you have a story that has a very happy outcome, it doesn't mean that you have to completely remove the conflict from the story, that you have to remove tension. It's just that these are not the goals, these are just vehicles to tell the story. And finally, the lowest point of your character lifts you higher, meaning that your character can lose, they can lose horribly, they can feel awful and have the worst time, but it's just one point on their hero's journey, and they will still rise above it and have a happy ending in the story. And that's the main difference between type 1 and type 2. But the most important part was that you're not alone. Many type 2 LARPs focus on the feeling of I'm alone with my very complex, very dark feelings, because nobody knows what I'm going through, and even if they do, they can't go through this with me. Everything about type 1 stories is about playing in a community and about manufacturing this feeling of we are in a group, and it's extremely important to design this game so that everyone has a space in this community. Never write a wholesome story with people who are alone. This what I learned is the hard way by playing LARP where I experienced the feeling of being alone. It was a very happy game, but I had nobody, while everyone else was in a group. So while the game was designed for this wholesomeness, I didn't feel it, even though my character's story technically should have been fine and happy. This is unfortunately something that will probably be true for a very long time. If you give LARPers a chance to pick type 1 LARP or a type 2 LARP, they will pick type 2. But I strongly believe that there is still hope for type 1, and that at some point somebody will decide to run more of these games, because I really want to play them, not just make them. Thank you very much. I really hope that this was something that will inspire you to also make some very cool type 1 game that I can sign up for.